A bright idea in learning and development is on its way. Learning Now TV. Coming soon.
And a very good morning, good evening, or good afternoon to you, wherever you're watching in the world today. Welcome to Learning Now TV.
That's what she'd like to be. A lovely heart, but good one, to soothe her vanity. She says that I'm her hero because I keep on bouncing back like Play-Doh. But I'm no scarlet woman, would you believe? To take her caution and toss it to the wind.
Let's take a look at what's coming up on tonight's programme.
It's now time for this month's broadcast of Learning Now TV.
Welcome everybody to a new show. This month is packed as usual. So, Kate, highlights for us.
Well, we've got a really busy schedule. We've got David James from Loop coming in to talk about all things modern workplace learning. We've got Liggy Webb coming in to talk about her new book on mental health. And we've got Danny Seals kicking off a new short series on experience design.
Sounds fantastic, and enjoy the show. We managed to rugby tackle David James and persuade him to come back to the Learning Now television studios to have a second session. We had such a great time the first interview. So David, welcome back to Learning Now TV. It's a real pleasure to talk to you again. And we're going to focus today on digital content development and the whole issue around why not many people are embracing new forms of content development. And there's you. You've just launched a learning and development podcast. It's been incredibly successful all over the world. You're a blogger, vlogger, whatever. You do it. I do it too. I do this program. I also have a blog. I write regularly. We're out there, and yet it doesn't quite translate across the whole of the L&D community in a world which is moving in that direction. Am I just crazy, or do you think that is an issue?
Yeah, well, according to the Tools Maturity Benchmark report this year, it seems that digital content development is one of certainly the least prevalent set of skills in the within learning and development functions, and that's as rated by professionals as well.
And that includes the kind of conventional digital development, doesn't it? The e-learning stuff as well. We're talking about a much broader definition of digital content development, aren't we?
Yeah, well, digital's moving fast, and how we define it today is going to be different.
Not the same as tomorrow.
No, exactly. But it is about understanding the mediums that we have available to us. And of course, it isn't just about further solutioneering. I think we've all been guilty of developing programs and providing content where perhaps we've not defined the issues as clearly as we should. But off the back of a real problem to be solved, if we then have more in our toolkit, more digital competence that we can lean on, then we're going to be better equipped to serve our clients.
Good, I agree with you. And do you think we gain that digital competence by doing, or do you think we gain it by going on long courses?
Well, I will always advocate the doing. I have a friend who is a stand-up comedian, and he's had his own podcast for 3 years. And there are two things people talk to him about, which is being a stand-up comedian and running a podcast. And he says the most common response he has from people is, I couldn't do that. And he says, no, you're not doing it, but you can, and this is the only way. So he's done both, never been on a training course for either. And that inspired me. And that's always at the front of my mind when thinking, well, I need to develop myself in a certain area. And I think that there's nothing better than rolling your sleeves up and just having a go. And of course, we've got guidance and support, and we've got access to a plethora of information and know-how online. But I think when it comes down to it, there's nothing quite like giving it a go and seeing if you can actually do it.
I think you're right, but I also think that when you do that, you put yourself out there. It's very visible. It's
Yeah.
very hard to do a podcast that no one's ever seen
That's
or no
right.
one's ever listened to, and therefore there's a reticence. But what you're saying, and I would agree, is that if you should try. And it's like walking a plank. It's really hard the first time. Second, third, fourth, fifth time, and then eventually it's second nature.
Yeah.
And it's rather like that. You're exposing yourself in a way, and you're exposing yourself in an area where perhaps you're not absolutely expert, but you learn by doing, and once you can do it, you can encourage others and inspire others, and then you get a much, much broader concept of what digital content is in your organisation.
Yeah.
And that makes it more interesting for everybody in the organisation, doesn't it?
Well, I think that we've always put ourselves out there. I mean, it takes a lot of guts to first get in front of a group of people, to get in front of a larger group into public speaking. I think we've got it in us. And then considering our role as facilitators of information and know-how, so we don't have to own that. So if we break it down and say, what is this? Some of it's copywriting, some of it's, as you and I will practice with our blogging. But it isn't necessarily just about going out there with your ideas. I read people on LinkedIn, professionals, in-house professionals, who are gluing ideas together and expressing those in new and interesting ways, and reading and really think it's great for them to be trying and getting their ideas across. Then I think that you've got, as we've been discussing, podcasting, and there are some very successful podcasts out which are around facilitating conversations rather than just giving opinion. My one, for example, and you've been a guest on, and we had a great conversation, but it wasn't necessarily me with the ideas. I was just the host, and of course it was your book, so I was facilitating a conversation around the topics of your book. And then if you look at video or vlogging, again, you could there is a bit of putting yourself out there, and if you're hosting it on YouTube, then a lot of people are going to have access. But there's just something about practicing and being comfortable enough to have that up your sleeve and know that you can either bring a video production team in and you know what you're talking about. It lowers the barrier to know that you can actually produce video with the help of other people or yourself. But I think that these are more flexible, they're more agile types of communication, and
they're the future as well, I think. I just get
yeah.
the feeling that that's what people do in their outside work life, so you've got to bring it into work. Do you think there is an issue here that learning professionals need to learn? They need to set themselves little learning journeys and learning tasks. And if everybody listening to this, watching this interview said, I'll do a little bit of vlogging, I'll do a little bit of podcasting, I'll write a little bit and then talk around it, I'll read a book and talk about that. They begin to work out for themselves a completely new strategy about digital content. And instead of it being a kind of daunting thing, it becomes quite straightforward. So there is a little impetus. You've got to take that first step, haven't you? Like you did with your blog. You just put yourself out there, you tried it, and it's been a fantastic success. But you were no world expert on blogs before you started that, were you?
No. I'd look back now and I feel slightly embarrassed at perhaps the writing, but it's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's just a journey that I've been on, and it's not to say that I've rocked the world with my latest blogs, but I certainly have become more confident in sharing my ideas. But it does come just about putting yourself out there, and I think a good step is if you recognise that you don't have competence or confidence in a particular area, but it keeps being talked about, that's probably the point at which you need to put
There's
that
a
foot forward.
signpost. Yes, there's a little neon sign there saying, go there, go there. I think that's right. And I think being a little less certain and a little less wanting everything to be perfect is actually quite a good strategy. And be honest, this is our first attempt. We're just really experimenting. Did you like this? How can we make it better? Not this is something we've worked on for 6 months and it's absolutely perfect, or this is what we've been doing for 5 years, we know exactly what we're doing. So a little bit of uncertainty, a little bit of experimentation, a little bit of innovation goes a long way with your people. They will respect that. They won't say, oh, well, that's a bit clunky. They'll say, they're trying. They're doing stuff that we like.
and doing something useful. So I love the phrase experimentation. I think that if you run experiments rather than programs, it's likely that you are really looking to see how something lands and whether it actually has the impact that you wish that it had, in order for you to scale that to a broader audience, rather than a program perhaps which lands in a fully formed state and then is scaled regardless of perhaps too many iterations. But I think that the opportunity we have with digital is that it's a light medium. Well, many of those that we discussed, they're light mediums. You can experiment, you'll get better. If you feel uncomfortable, then it's likely because you are developing. But yeah, give it a go, and in service of clearly defined goals.
It's also disposable.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, try something else. But so what we're saying, we're really holding up a little sign and saying, let's have a bit more experimentation, a teeny bit more courage, and a willingness to admit we're not perfect here, we don't know everything, we'll make mistakes, and create a community that will learn together. I think that's a very, very good message, David. So, David, thank you so much for speaking to me today.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Nigel.
Thank you.
Next up is our regular reporter, Robin Hoyle, and he is delving into psychological profiling. So things like DISC, MBTI. Expect some controversy as usual.
Hello. I was invited to speak at a conference a few weeks ago, and after my session had finished, which went very well actually, thanks for asking, I saw that there was a session in another room around high-performance teams. So I thought, oh, that's interesting, I'll go and have a look. So I snuck in the back, and the session was about use of a psychological profiling tool. Now, the presenter was saying, look, there's a number of psychological profiling tools that you can use. You could use DISC, or you could use MBTI, and he then gave us a series of coloured cards and asked people to determine which of those coloured cards most closely described who we thought we were. Now, the overarching outcome of this was that people were encouraged to ensure that they had a good mix of the colours within their teams, because then they would cover all the bases required for a team to be effective and efficient. I might think that is some pseudo-scientific pop psychology babble. In fact, I do. The instruments that are used to determine whether or not you're on ENFP or an ISTJ, whether you are predominantly green, red, yellow or blue, are not, in my opinion, particularly robust, nor necessarily psychologically valid. However, we've been making that argument for a lot of time. And what was really interesting was to look at the audience of about 80, 90 people in that room who were absolutely on board with it. They loved it. They thought it was really insightful and really useful. And I started to think that maybe we've lost that argument, that we have to look afresh at psychological profiling. Not because I want us all to suddenly start doing MBTI within our training interventions. I remember a couple of years ago at the World of Learning conference, Fons Trompenaars talking about MBTI, saying that Myers and Briggs, the mother and daughter team who came up with the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs temperament instrument, did this around their kitchen table over a weekend. And after he told us that, there was a slight beat, and then he said, I often wonder what they did after Saturday lunchtime. So, yeah, clearly there are some opinion out there, many of which I share, which says these things are neither robust nor valid nor psychologically relevant. But I'm wondering if maybe our argument needs to move away from the fact that they're not particularly useful towards a focus which says that there is an inherent belief which underpins these particular instruments. And that is, however they are presented by their advocates, however the people who say, this doesn't mean that you're always this or always that. The reality is, particularly in our times where people are very focused around their identity, that is exactly what people take from that process. And when they're taking that information from that process, what they're actually saying is, this is me and I cannot change. Now, I think in learning and development, we're all about enabling people to change. And so use of this kind of toolkit to put people in a little box is always problematic for me. Because if people are saying, that's me, that's who I am, I just learn this way, or I just respond to situations this way, or I'm not particularly interested in detail and working with experts, I'm good at thinking and feeling and all of those sorts of things, then we start to cause ourselves some problems in actually enabling people to change, to develop, to grow as human beings. And that's got to be central to what it is that we do, isn't it? So I think our campaign against these tools needs not to be focused on whether or not they are robust or psychologically valid, but whether or not they're actually putting people into that fixed mindset where I can't change because this is who I am. And if it is, then we need to say that's why we're not embracing these kinds of tools, because we don't want people to think of themselves in a little box. And when people ask me what I am an EMPF or an ISTJ or anything like that, I have a ready response for them. I'm Sagittarius.
In the L&D world, we all know our biggest challenge is knowledge fade and demonstrating ROI from our training interventions. At Elephants Don't Forget, we use artificial intelligence to guarantee that what you train your employees, they learn and retain. If you are looking to transform the impact your training content has in your business, improve the ROI, and perhaps help employees learn and retain even the dull regulatory material, drop me a line at nelly@elephantsdon'tforget.com.
I'm thrilled to be able to welcome our next guest to Learning Now Television. Danny Seals is an experienced architect at GP Strategies and one of the most creative people I know. So no pressure, Danny, but thanks for coming along today.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
So learning experience is kind of quite the buzzword at the moment. But in terms of experience design, what is your take on it?
Good question. So my take on experience design, how I see it, it's about crafting the kind of the experience as a whole, but looking at how you, let's just call them people, how our people, their interactions within that experience, and then kind of looking at it and thinking, right, if this is the experience, how do we shape it to have an emotional response? So that can be looking at kind of the senses, the space, what we're in, the movement within that space. So it can be a really big, bold thing, but it can also be something really, really tiny. So it's I can see where the confusion comes from, but that's kind of my definition of it.
Because lots of people just think user experience, and obviously it's not the same as that. And do you think that it's become sort of L&D is latching onto it because there's that emotional connection and therefore that helps people learn better? Yeah and no. So I think within the learning and development world, we see quite a lot. We jump onto the next buzzword because we all like to be magpies and it's like the new shiny thing. I guess the way I see it is we take a word, so like look at how design thinking is happening right now, and we take it from another industry, and then we go, right, we've got this really cool thing like design thinking, and then we're going to water it down and water it down and water it down, and then by the time it's being used fully throughout, say, L&D, it's very, very far removed from what its original purpose was. I think the issue what we have with experience design is similar to that. You know, nobody wants to kind of be left behind, especially when it comes to that thing of you hear all the fame we've got to be ahead of it, we've got to be future. So it's really simple to kind of quickly change our LinkedIn thing and say, oh, I'm this week and I'm this week. So yeah, it's
it's a bit of I get where it comes from. It's a fear thing as much as it is.
So now you talk about you were doing experience design before you knew it was experience design.
Yep.
So can you talk to us a little bit about some of the stuff that you've done in the past? So organisations like O2, Tesco Mobile, you've done some really cool creative stuff. So can you talk to us a little bit about some of those examples?
Yeah, I guess one what jumps out really quickly, obviously, kind of just being mindful of time, is O2 and Tesco Mobile had an issue with security, DPA. So a lot of the time it was...
Data protection.
Yeah, data protection, yeah, sorry. And a lot of the time it was the customer would call through and the advisor would deal with the customer. And obviously the advisor have the day-to-day life going on and stuff. And we just really didn't care about these DPA breaches. So the business comes to us and said, how can we stop this from happening? I said, well, nobody really cares. It's not their information, what's getting breached. It's not like it's a family member or anything like that. So we went away and kind of looked at how we can kind of create an experience around it. So the experience which I created was a social engineering experience. And basically you was given a name of someone who was, I don't know, in the call centre. And without speaking to him, you had to build this profile up about this person. So it was like who they were, the school, what they went to, the kids' names, the this, the that. And you built this profile up. And what it was is by the end of it, you'd say, oh, my person was Bob. And then it's really scary for Bob when he hears all this information, what's leaked out about him, without actually speaking to him. So it's how can we create that emotional jerk to where it matters, at which point when it matters, we can kind of scaffold that with resources and with just-in-time learning and with digitals. It's about giving them, we've got to give them that experience to make them care first, else we can throw everything we want at it and it just won't matter.
You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Spot on.
And what about the undercover boss example that you've told me about in the past?
Yeah, so undercover boss was another one. It was day one when we was doing kind of, it was like, day one of inductions. And it was a case of, in a call centre environment, you know, the bosses, the operation managers, they all kind of dress similar to us. They don't wear ties and they don't look, you know, they're not booted and suited. And they had this issue where people were coming in and because of that, they didn't really know who was who. So it's about setting that expectation of, actually, you need to be, you know, you can be talking to someone in here who's head of the call centre. So basically, day one, me and another trainer, Sakib, who was a mentor of mine, we would kind of go undercover. So on day one, we'd sit in where they was and we'd pretend we was new. And then we'd wait and we'd create these little stories of we got sacked at other call centres and stuff like this and just build up a bit of drama. And then at 9:05, we'd like jump up and be like, hey, we're going to be your trainers for the next X amount of weeks or whatever.
Uh-oh.
And it was just a quick, simple nudge. It was a case of be mindful that the person you're standing next to in the lift could actually be the head of a call centre or whatnot. So when I talk about this big and small, that was just a real small change, but it meant that we didn't have to address it again. It was job done. So yeah, that's a quick way.
So, and they're quite, like I say, they're quite creative ways of tackling that. And you talk about being human-centred in terms of your design.
Yeah.
So is it just a case of stepping back from all the kind of resources and courses and all of these things that we can sometimes get bogged down with in L&D and just going, right, where do I start?
Yeah. So the problem is if we don't address the people's problem, they're not going to care about our solution at the end. And human-centered design is fundamentally that. It's about understanding the problem from the people who are going through it. Once we can understand it and walk in them shoes, we're much better at fixing the problem. So experience design is kind of looking at it from the eyes of the person. So, i.e., day one induction, you would design around the person going into that day one. So human-centered design is putting a person bang centre of the problem and understanding it and working your way out.
So now you've written about a lot about this on your LinkedIn articles.
Yeah.
So you talk about the macro, the micro and the nano.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into that in some future episodes. Aren't you going to come back and talk to us again about it?
Yes, we are.
So you have an alter ego as well.
Yep.
I'm keen for you to be able to let people know where to find you.
Okay. So, yeah, Mindchimp. So where to find me? It's a tricky one. I think if you type Mindchimp in, anything will come up. But I've got a podcast. The Mindchimp podcast.
It's excellent.
Yeah, thank you. I've had a lot of people who's been on here. And basically we just chat and understand them, what shapes their ideas, their thoughts. But it also gives a platform for people who might not have that platform in place, and it gives them somewhere to where they can share their ideas.
Fantastic. And is it at MindChimp?
Yeah, at MindChimp on Twitter, and then obviously me, the Danny Seals. I'm not some sort of like egomaniac. It's basically Danny Seals was taken. So yeah.
All right, I'll believe you. I'll believe you.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, and we look forward to having you back again soon.
Perfect. Thanks very much.
E-Learning Network, which I have been involved with for a number of years, is a community organisation for the digital learning community where people can get together and learn from each other and share best practice. And alongside Learning Design Live, we have a big conference in London in November, and then 4 or 5 workshops around the country to bring some of the people in our network to give talks, to have a space where people can come and get a coffee and collaborate and meet us. So it's that kind of collaboration.
Now it's time for our regular correspondent Michelle Parry-Slater to kick off a new series in conjunction with the Charity Learning Consortium. This month she's going along to the Salvation Army Housing Association to talk to Paul Hodgkinson about their L&D strategy.
Today we're at the Salvation Army Housing Association, known as SAHA, and we're going to be talking to Paul Hodgkinson about strategy. Now, strategy in L&D, do we do it well? Do we even get involved in it? If we're still on that journey from transactional shopkeeper, as Andrew Jacobs calls it, to consultative learning and development, perhaps it doesn't feel relevant to us. But certainly in the third sector, it's something that's very relevant. When you're thinking about how you're going to get your funding and proving the value of learning and development, strategy can be very important. So, Paul, what I'm really keen to talk to you about then is strategy. In the third sector, it's as important as it is in the corporate sector.
Yes.
And of course, people get scared of it.
Yeah, they do.
Can you talk us through, how have you done things?
Yeah. For me, it's that point about being scared. So don't get scared by the word strategy. So for me, it's about understanding what does it mean for where you are now. So there's a piece around, you can do it in 8 weeks, which is what I did here.
That's pretty quick.
It is very quick.
How did you do that?
Yeah, for me, it's about letting people know who you are as quick as possible, getting to those people that make the decisions.
So what did that look like? Coffee?
Yeah, so coffee
accosting
and
them in
chat.
the corridor?
No, absolutely. A bit of everything. So definitely grab them for coffee, pop into their office, catch them in the corridor.
And what are you talking about there? Are you talking about what they're doing every day?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, what you do need to do is be clear on what it is you're doing, being able to describe something in a simple sentence, because there's nothing worse than getting into a lift and rabbling on and then that person walking out and just going, what was that about?
Yeah.
So being able to sort of distill everything you do into a couple of sentences, I think that's useful. Being confident, saying it often and to many different people, because then I think you pick up the language of the business, which is really important. I think it's getting to understand, it's a bit of the feel of the business as well, because every office has got a different vibe, and trying to get under the skin of that quite quickly as well. Being approachable, I think that's useful. So when people come up to your desk, or if you're wandering around, it's not, you're some sort of scary figure looking at this strategy thing, because people.
So they know you the person.
Yeah. So so make sure that people know you visually or around the office, that you're sharing your stuff online or however you do it in your business area. I think that just starts to, chip away at, I suppose the untouchability of it, and getting away from that strategy thing. It's just, yeah.
Okay, so there's loads of really practical examples there. This whole piece is always about practical stuff that people can do.
Yeah.
So you've got this this whole sense of having a conversation with people, really understanding the organisation that you're working within and what they're trying to achieve, and then you come up with your L&D strategy. Do you want to just talk us through? So what is HAR's strategy?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the most important thing was the vision. We need to have a direction of travel. People need to galvanise around something.
Is that an L&D vision, or is that an organisational vision?
Both, actually. So
sometimes they can get a little bit...
Yeah, they can get a bit muddy, can't they? So absolutely, you need to be respectful and aligned to the business strategy. So that was already in place. That wasn't going to change. but also then it was picking up on all the other data that was telling us that learning was something that needs to be explored and developed. So we used things like the engagement data, we had performance data, we had a run of focus groups, so I had a whole cross-functional group of business
So that data piece, just give me a little bit more on that, because so many organisations are scared of the data. L&D doesn't get involved in the data, and if they are getting involved in data, they're getting involved in input data. How many people were there? How many times did we run it? But were you looking more at output or even better outcome data?
For me, it's where we wanted to be.
Okay,
yeah,
so it's a journey for you as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So we need to be absolutely clear, what do we want to see from this team and what's the business want from us in a year's time, 2 years' time, 5 years' time. It's about everything we do now has to have an impact in the future. So it's going in with that mindset as opposed to, what does your level 1 feedback form look like? That's useful, but is it going to tell you what 5 years' time looks like? So that it's looking at all that data, and then it was just about wordsmithing potential examples of what a vision looked like, and then stick it under the nose of people that matter. So that's those frontline staffs in our service areas, or people here in head office as well, and just going, actually, does that mean something to you? Is it resonating? Do you believe it? Because
interesting. So you were actually testing the data that you had.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this data was then feeding into the strategy, and the whole thing just gets a lot better.
Yeah, because if you don't use the people around you, then you become that department that sits just off to the side of the business. We've got to be a part of the business.
Totally and utterly agree with you.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things I know that we talked about off camera was around the priorities.
Yes.
And that's one of the tricky things, isn't it? It's all well and good having a strategy, but how do you make that strategy come alive in real terms? How did you prioritise? How did you know what to do first? What were your quick wins?
Yeah, the quick wins were, who were the key audiences that needed attention? And it became very clear very quickly that our manager population, particularly our people managers, needed support now. So instead of waiting for 6 or 12 months time for some, lovely polished program, it was just actually, what do they need right now? What can we give them? So it was things like we could give them a whole bunch of content that we could push through online, through videos and job aids and stuff like that.
This is so exciting. This is the third sector, and everyone's assumption is the third sector doesn't, they're just the voluntary people, what do they know? But you're doing really fantastic work.
Yeah, and also asking them, because what came out of it is obviously we've used other vendors out there before, so why can't we just get them in for a lunch and learn, for a coffee and chat, get a group of I'm really into action learning, so getting a group of managers around the table and let's talk about people management, let's talk about a particular case study or what's going on, using live data. Obviously you can anonymise it and talk through it that way, but it's the way to generate interest, because if you've not got a hook, people just go, oh, it's another L&D bod doing stuff, and stuff doesn't matter sometimes, does it?
Well, it sounds like you're doing just such great stuff. I'm really glad that you shared your story with us on Learning Now TV. Thank you so much.
No problem.
And I want to keep in touch. I want to hear how it pans out.
Tell you about the next stage.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
No worries.
So come back next time when we'll continue this series sponsored by the Charity Learning Consortium, talking about things that are happening in the third sector that we can do in our corporate L&D lives. Really great stuff is going on there, and it's really exciting to be part of this series.
I love peering behind the curtain, and today we're going to talk to Ewan Semple. He's going to explain to us how he uses tech to manage his day-to-day life. It's absolutely fascinating.
Hi there.
The last couple of videos that I've recorded for Learning Now TV, I have referred to some applications or processes that I do on a day-to-day basis, and Colin thought it might be a good idea for me to go into a bit more detail about the technologies and apps that I use in everyday life that you might find interesting or useful. And so what I thought I would do is just run through a normal day and the different tools and apps that I use as I go through that day. And every day pretty much starts with my watch, because I have an alarm on the watch which is just a vibration. It doesn't have any sound associated with it, and given that I sometimes have to be up as early as 4 o'clock in the morning for my driving work, this avoids anybody else in the house being disturbed, or at least tries to avoid disturbing them as I get up. But then the second thing that I look at is the tracker that manages to record my sleep overnight. And so quite often I'll wake up, especially if you've got to get up early, you can wake up feeling that you haven't slept at all, and you're going to have a hard day, you're going to feel tired all day. But then a quick glance at the application on my phone, it's called Sleep++, but there's many others, lets me know how many hours I have actually slept, and also how deeply I've slept, which is based on the movements through the night. And 9 times out of 10, it will indicate that I've actually had a much better night's sleep than I thought I had. So I'll go off to work feeling much better than I would have done otherwise. The next thing I use the watch for is just a nudge to remind me to take some medicines. So again, it vibrates, and it just makes sure that I take the medicines before I head off. I'll then look at my calendar to make sure what I'm doing and where I'm doing it. But I also look at an application called OmniFocus, which basically runs my life. OmniFocus is based on principles called Getting Things Done, written by a guy called David Allen, nearly 20 years ago now. And David's a hero of mine, I guess. I got to meet him a few years ago. And just the whole set of principles that are in that book have allowed me to basically handle an awful lot of information, a lot of things to do, without getting bent out of shape by it. And the idea is that you have an easy way to capture ideas or thoughts or things you need to do that go into a trusted system that then reminds you at the right time, the right place to do them. So again, back to the watch, when I'm driving, there'll be quite often things I'll need to remember to do, or just the thought processes will open up and I'll think of an idea to blog something perhaps. And don't want to take my hands off the wheel too long because of risks driving. You know, we shouldn't be using our phones while we're driving. But I can just easily lift my watch to my mouth and dictate something. So I'll just show you how I do this. Hey Siri, remind me to record a new video for Learning Now TV tomorrow.
Here's your reminder.
So that's now gone into OmniFocus. It means the next time I'm at a computer or my phone or my iPad, it will pop up tomorrow and remind me. So that's a fantastic app, thoroughly recommended. The next thing relating to driving is that I have an app that tracks my driving hours. So it's complicated how I make sure that I don't drive for too long. I have the right brakes. There are different rules that sometimes overlap and conflict. So again, I have an app, this one's called Truck Tracker, which allows me to make sure that I don't overdo the amount of driving that I do. And then another one that I use is a specific sat-nav for trucks, which makes sure that I don't encounter bridges that are too low or can't take the weight of my truck. So again, using technology all through the day. A more generally applicable tool that you might be interested in is a journaling app called Day One, which again I've used for years as a way of just recording activities, thoughts, ideas through the day. But I also now use it for my driving. So I've got a specific driving journal, and the app tracks where I am all day and notices if I've been somewhere more than a couple of minutes, and then identifies that in an activity stream. And this means that I can go back at the end of a day, see where I've stopped for my various deliveries, exactly when I arrived, exactly when I left, and then I can use this to record what happened in between. And sometimes I'll additionally take a photograph of something that happened, or maybe I had to leave some goods behind for the customer, and I'm able to take a picture of where I left them. So again, immensely useful to be able to do that. And then all through the day, I'll listen to podcasts and audiobooks. So again, I'm doing that on the phone, but not touching the phone. I can just play them from my watch and choose which one to listen to from the watch. And then at the end of the day, I read all the time. So when I'm not working, I tend to be reading, and I read on the Kindle app on my phone. So again, you know, just an enabling, empowering, useful use of technology. And yes, I do social media and I do email and all the other things, but really without my phone, I would just be nothing like as productive as I aspire to be. So hopefully that's given you some ideas and thoughts about what you might care to do yourselves with your own technologies. See you next time.
Studies have shown that learning programs are now crucial weapons in the fight to attract and retain talent. Working closely with modern learning organisations across the globe, we have developed Learning Programs of Excellence, a prestigious award recognising exceptional, state-of-the-art learning programs. If you're a learning department or function, LPE will help you attract new talent. You'll boost your appeal as an employer by showcasing the calibre of your learning programs and development opportunities within your organisation. If you're a provider of learning, LPE gives you an absolute guarantee that your learning programs are capable of creating a lasting positive effect on performance and business outcomes. Get in touch with the Learning and Performance Institute now and begin your Learning Program of Excellence journey.
Every month on Learning Now Television, we feature a state-of-the-art, new state-of-the-art research report brought to us by our friend Martin Cousins. And this month we're looking at a report by Slack. I think it's the first report or piece of research that I've seen produced by Slack, and it's called The State of Work. Why did you pick it, Martin?
Because it talks to 17,000 people globally. So I think it's just an interesting take on what work looks like.
And how it's changing as well.
And Slack's an interesting company, so I was kind of drawn to that. So there's some quite interesting takeaways from this bit of research, and they've tried to sort of shape it in a fairly interesting way.
I agree with it. It's not just promoting Slack, but it is saying the impact of technologies in the workplace, and particularly learning technologies in the workplace.
Yeah, and their angle is around alignment.
Yes.
And how aligned people are to the company's purpose, values and strategy.
Yes.
Now, that was it. That was the bit that interested me, because what they say on alignment is a worker who's aligned is someone who says that I feel aligned with my company's vision, values and operating principles. So they do the research based on whether you're aligned or not aligned.
And the implication is that you need technology to help build that network and build that community to stay aligned or to create alignment in the first place, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's more. So it's basically understanding what a workplace
is. Yes.
Yeah, but an employer, what do they have to do?
Yes.
To try and
create
help people be aligned with what they're trying to achieve. Now, why is this important? Because basically, the data shows that most knowledge workers, around 70%, are either somewhat aligned, somewhat unaligned, or agnostic, i.e. they don't feel strongly either way about alignment. And 29% are strongly aligned. So basically, most people in organisations are pretty, agnostic. They're not massively
not committed.
Yeah, they're not massive. They wouldn't say they're massively aligned to the purpose of the organisation. Why does this matter? It matters because of things like this. Because aligned workers, 75% of aligned workers feel empowered to make strategic decisions versus 22% who don't. 90% of aligned workers understand what they need to do in their role to be successful versus 43%. And 76% say that the company has the tools and systems in place to adapt quickly to industry changes versus 19% of unaligned workers.
Yes.
But the point is, the vast bulk of the workforce is not really very aligned, and yet there is a huge benefit
to productivity.
Yeah, I mean, people know what's going on.
Empowerment, people taking decisions, doing stuff that they wouldn't normally do. All of that.
Yeah, and the organisation is responsive.
Yes.
So, that's the kind of bulk, the heart of the research. Is kind of talking about this alignment. So then they talk about how you communicate that, and basically, the most aligned people, they feel most aligned rather when the communication is really regular, sort of on an almost hourly basis, versus those that feel like people are communicating around with them sort of once a day. So when the business is sharing stuff on a regular basis, they feel far more part of it. Now
but they up the ante in terms of a regular basis, and I think that's really important. We're not talking about once a month, once a week, once a day. We're talking about almost minute by minute communication. That obviously requires a very sophisticated technology infrastructure to be able to deliver that.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds a bit over the top.
But it probably isn't.
But what we're talking about, if you look at how people like to be communicated with, collaboration tools are the best way to communicate.
Yes.
Versus video, meetings, blog, the internet. So that's quite interesting, and maybe that comes back to Slack.
Could do.
Funnily enough,
could do.
They like being communicated with on tools like Slack. But I don't think that research set out to say that. But it's quite interesting because it comes back to this idea of social. How do we connect
informal
peers,
communication, constant interaction. Looking to each other for support, problem solving on the fly, all of those things. And that's why I think the report is very important. What it's actually putting its finger on is that work is changing really fast, and many organisations just are totally unaware of that or don't care. And yet those organisations that get on to that get all the productivity gains from aligned people who are committed, take decisions, do stuff that they wouldn't do otherwise. So it's actually quite important, even though there is an underlying let's use Slack, that's not really dominant in the report. And it's making some very important points about the modern workplace and the modern workforce, I think. And you'd be crazy to ignore those points. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think so. And I think also it just puts in the centre of the conversation around what a successful business is like is that whole idea of what the purpose is. What do people turn up every day to do, and why do they do it? That is at the heart of this.
And it's putting together those two things. It's saying that issue around purpose and commitment and constant communication and networking, those two things aren't separate. They're actually aligned together. That's the alignment that organisations need to build. So worth reading, I think. Download that. It's freely available. Produced by Slack, State of Work. Read it. I think it's got some essential, thoroughly researched data in it. Large numbers, valid data, as far as I can see. Yes. Martin, thank you so much for drawing attention to it.
Thank you.
Pitching our leadership course recently, the response was, we get it. You're not about teaching a few leadership techniques, you're about transforming the organisation. And that's right. Imagine an organisation where people are energised and motivated by being in control of what they do. Imagine they're trusted and given freedom to absolutely work at their best. Imagine they have managers who coach them rather than tell them what to do. Wouldn't you like to work in that environment? That's what we can help you create through our leadership programs to develop the skills, and through our consultancy to help you with your processes and the things you need to change. That's Happy. We can help you create a truly happy, productive workplace.
Our regular correspondent, Brent Schlenker, trips around conferences all over the US. This time he's been to Florida to the Step Away and Play conference. He's going to tell us what he learnt about gamification and other aspects of the conference.
Oh, hi everybody. Hey, I've got a question for you. What do you get when you take a fantastic game-themed location and combine it with a bunch of really excited, passionate learning experience developers? Well, I'll tell you, you get stepaway.design. We're here for a week talking about learning and experiencing, building our own games and our own learning experiences based on game thinking and game design. The whole entire event was designed by Dr. Carl Kopp, Kevin Thorne, and Debbie Thomas.
I was one of millions of people that saw a viral video go by a couple years ago about this really cool vacation resort outside of Orlando. And it's a giant game house, 15,000 square foot house with 15 rooms, 10 acres, and everything is themed after a game. The house is a game. This is the lobby, or the main common area. Look down the hall that way, sort of some bedrooms down there. We'll show you those in a little while. We've got the theater, big Jumanji theater. backside, and on this side we've got some more of the common area with breakfast going on. And we had talked about this before, about how difficult it is to get everything you need to know to design, go through the design process, but folks having difficulty actually having an opportunity to apply what they've learned. So we thought, why don't we put a week-long event together, take my visual storytelling and comics kind of design process, take the game design process, mash them together in one big week-long event, and let's live inside a big game house while we do it. And the first thing I thought of was Carl.
So one day, Kevin Thorne came to me with this crazy idea and said, Carl, I found this really cool house. It's all kinds of games, and wouldn't you love to come and like spend a week there, and we could do a workshop, and we could create games and do visuals and do Lego and all that cool stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, a house filled with games, I'm there. So that's really kind of how it started. And then Kevin's like, oh, I was talking to Deborah, and I'm like, oh, I know Deborah, she's awesome, let's have her involved. So all three of us got involved, and now we're kind of trying to pioneer a new kind of concept and getting people together to think about experience design, game design, and visual thinking, so that people can kind of expand their minds and what they think about learning and development.
My favorite part was seeing what they built. And today we play tested some games. But they've been building things all week. They've built Lego models that kind of describe their game ideas, for instance, or business problems they were solving.
Read the scenario. Based on the scenario, you're going to pick the action card that is the most appropriate response for responding to that scenario. But to validate your choice, you're going to have to role play this with your other player. Okay. And as the servant leader, I'm going to assess how well you role play.
And it's going to have a booklet that describes how to play the game. So they walk through from start to finish how to create a game. They got all the design theory, game design theory, day one, and we just went through the process, and they, some of them I don't think thought they could do it, and everybody ended up with a game that was incredible. I mean, really fun. We're cracking up today trying to play these games.
Well, he said, where'd you get the idea? So,
So so we go through the role play. No, is the role play?
Our expectation, or my expectation really, was that a group of people would get together and we would work on common problems and concepts and kind of work through the design process in the backdrop of like a really interesting kind of unique place. And it turns out that's really what happened. People were, we had an evening where we went into the Clue Room, which was an escape room.
By then, you'll have found an Android phone with a second app. Input the correct murder mystery information into it.
One night we went up to the room that had Lego in it. We had these giant Lego bricks, and we created this step away. And so it was a really great atmosphere for people to just kind of let loose a little bit and let the creative juices kind of get going and think about, oh, well, if I didn't have any kind of constraints of every day, what could I create? What could I make? What could I think about? And that's kind of what happened, and that was our expectation. It turned out a lot better than we thought, in terms of the camaraderie, in terms of, we joke all week about nobody wearing shoes, that kind of stuff. So it was a really good time.
This place is incredible. I wish we could stay here another week and actually play a lot. We didn't even get to play a lot of the games, which is why we can't wait to come back.
Wow, that's pretty cool, right? So we've got a lot of work left to do. I'm going to get back to it. They're still learning a lot. I don't want to miss anything else, but I just had to stop and take a moment and share with you guys the fantastic event called stepaway.design. You guys have to stay connected with these folks and be sure to try and join us next year. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thanks so much. I'm Brent Schlenker from the US. Back to you guys.
So I'm delighted to welcome author and speaker Liggy Webb to Learning Now Television today. You can see I've got some props in my hand. This is a series of bite-sized books that Liggy has authored on a variety of topics, things like mental health, resilience and winter well-being. So Liggy, thank you very much for being with us today. So can you tell us a little bit about this series and why some of these topics are important to you and important to the readers?
Okay, well, it's lovely to be here, and I'm really going to enjoy chatting to you about this. I'm very enthusiastic about my bite-sized book series.
We like enthusiasm.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of complexity out there at the moment. I think people are being bombarded with so much information, and I'm a real fan of being able to distill complexity and put things across in a very clear, but most of all, very practical way. Hence the reason I decided to start writing bite-sized books. I've written a few books, and about a couple of years ago, I started sort of dabbling around with this concept of really sort of distilling complexity. The first book I wrote was a book which was a spin-off from my main book, which is Resilience: How to Cope When Everything Around You Keeps Changing. And from that, I've written a whole series, including the topics you've talked about. Burnout is one that I've recently written about, because that is, according to the World Health Organization, the 21st century health epidemic. So I think supporting people in that area is so important.
I was just about to say, it feels like a book and topics for our times.
Absolutely, absolutely. We are living in a very volatile, uncertain times, lots of complexity, and I think mental health is such an important topic. In fact, hot off the press this week is going to be my next book, which is all around the menopause. Oh. So that's going to be an interesting one.
And again, it's one of those topics that no one really wants to maybe talk about, but is really important and affects a lot of people in the workplace.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, menopausal women are the fastest growing demographic in the workplace. We've got somewhere about 4.4 million people who are going to be experiencing that. But it's not just about women. It's also about how that affects other people, because I think menopause can be a very confusing time for women. And that in itself is just another area of our mental health that we need to embrace and have more candour and more confidence to be able to talk about.
And also, how do managers deal with that? If they're not equipped, if they're men or they don't know anything about it, or they're younger women or whatever, and they're not fit, they don't have first-hand experience, how do they go about coping with it?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, menopause isn't ladies' business, it's everybody's business. So I think, having that conversation, that open conversation is very important.
So how do you distill something like mental health into such a small, bite-sized book?
Well, I think, this is kind of rich learning for time-poor people, because right now we haven't really got the time to absorb lots of information. So I think it's quite handy for people to have somebody who can distill that complexity. And I like to research. I love research. I think it's very important that anything out there is heavily evidenced. So I like to do quite a lot of research around that. I'm very fortunate because I work with a really eclectic range of organisations. So, from being a consultant with the United Nations to the NHS to the BBC to the World Trade Organization, so lots of different organisations, which gives me a fantastic opportunity to be able to look at everybody from every single background, really embrace this sort of idea with regards to diversity and listening to people. So a lot of what I do is take research, distill that information, but I combine that with real people's stories. So I get lots of experience from listening to people. I'm quite curious by nature, so I tend to ask a lot of questions anyway.
Yeah.
But gathering all of that information, and I also work with a wonderful cartoonist who has been quite inspirational, a guy called Gary Godel, who's just been amazing. So we've kind of worked together producing these books, and it seems to be working really well. I've sold thousands and thousands of them, literally, since we launched in March, which has been quite exciting. And I've also set up my Just Giving page for Mind, because I'm very passionate about supporting mental health charities. And I also work in collaboration with the Charity Learning Consortium.
Right. Friends of the show.
Absolutely. An organisation that I think every charity should really be a part of. It's a wonderful collaboration. We've been working together, sharing ideas of what will be the next really useful topic to be writing about.
Well, I was going to say, so with some of the organisations that you work with, are you responding to a demand for some of this topic? Is it demand-led, what you're writing?
Oh, yes, and I think it really needs to be. I mean, I'm kind of always listening. I work with an organisation as well called Cornerstone On Demand.
Right.
And that has been inspirational for me. There's some, great fresh thinking happening there. So I'm constantly listening to, what's important, what's relevant for this very kind of agile, I guess, world that we're living in. And there are lots of topics out there that I feel are very important. In fact, the next book I'm working on is around kindness. Because I really believe that, compassion and kindness is such an important part of our mental health.
And do you see some of the trends where we had a lot of these Silicon Valley kind of startups and this kind of, working all the hours God sends and having pizza at the office? There just seemed to be a bit of a kickback to that. And, people make comments about millennials, but I think sort of from what I can see in Gen Z and millennials, they kind of want a better work-life balance. And actually the older people among us could stand to learn a bit from that.
Absolutely. I think we can all learn a lesson from slowing down a bit and being a little bit more mindful and absolutely, because I think what's happening right now is people seem to be working a lot harder but not necessarily smarter. We need to get that balance right. That is so important. My dad's got a great expression. I'm going to share this one with you. He says, if you want to go a bit faster, slow down. And I love that because I think we're all running at a sort of breakneck speed, really.
I think it's something I've learned as I've got older, is just to take a moment and pause and then, gather yourself and then move on. So where can people find your books, Liggy?
Well, if people want to find the books and explore the open library, it's free to access, and that's on the learningarchitect.com website.
Okay.
And if people want to just email me and have requests or questions, or if any females out there and men would like a free copy of my menopause book, they're very welcome to do that. And if they just email me, liggy@liggyweb.com.
Fantastic. Liggy, thank you so much for coming in. What a breath of fresh air to be talking about some of these important topics.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Whoever you are, wherever you're from, you can network with professionals and experts on the award-winning DPG community.
You can choose to look at articles, videos, podcasts. You can look at comments that people have made. I find it my first stop when I'm thinking about L&D. If I have a question or I want to learn more, that's the first place I go.
Just head online and search for DPG Community and sign up free today.
Well, what a fantastic show. I hope you enjoyed it. But before we go, Nigel, what events are coming up in the next month?
Well, 3 in November that are really worth mentioning. The first is the CIPD annual conference, and then ELN are having a conference in London with Robin Hoyle, our very own Robin Hoyle, as keynote speaker. And finally, pack your bags for Berlin, because OEB takes place at the end of the month.
3 brilliant events. We hope you look forward to them, and we look forward to seeing you next time.